What's good, everybody? This is CP, and today I'm going to talk about the Edmonton Oilers. I'm going to take a look at a list of current roster players that could be traded before the start of next season to improve this team. Now, the first player on my list is Duncan Keith. Keith will be turning 39 next year, so if he doesn't retire and comes back, I think he'll continue to regress. And if the Oilers do continue to give him second pairing minutes, then I think it'll be very, very hard to build on what they achieved this year, which was reaching the Western Conference Finals. Now, the biggest drawback with the Duncan Keith situation is obviously his cap hit, which isn't cheap at 5.5. And at his age, I don't think many teams will be lining up to trade for a 39-year-old defenseman next year. So simply put, I think it'll be very, very hard for Holland to find a trade partner. And we also can't forget that Keith has an MMC, so a no movement clause in his contract. With that in mind, out of everyone on this list, I feel like there will be very, very few takers on Keith. But if Ken Holland can somehow pull it off, then I think it will be a huge move for the Oilers. Because with Keith gone, they will probably inject someone in a second pairing role who could be a lot cheaper than 5.5 and probably has more upside to improve for the next few years. One candidate might be Brett Kulak, actually, who, if the Oilers do decide to resign him, he should come at a much cheaper price, and I feel like he's still in his prime and has a little bit more upside than Keith, who is on the downtrend. Now, the second player on my trade list is Zack Kassian. I think this might be the offseason where the Oilers are finally going to move on from Kassian. Obviously, one of the biggest reasons why I think they might try to move him is because of his cap hit, which is at a $3.2 million cap hit for 2 more years. In my opinion, this is a little bit too much for what he brings to the table. Because for whatever reason, over the last 2 seasons, especially after the COVID lockdown in early 2020, Kassian's play has dropped off quite a bit. Personally, I'm not a huge Kassian hater. I was actually a huge fan of his play, especially during his early Oiler days. I feel like when he is on his game, he can be a very, very effective player and a very intimidating player to play against. I think many Oiler fans would agree that if he can become that player from around 2017 to 2020 again and chip in around 15 goals and be an intimidating force every night, then I don't think too many fans will have any problems keeping him on that roster at a $3.2 million cap hit. But unfortunately, over the past 2 seasons, we saw very little of that. And maybe only a few games in the playoffs this year. Maybe it's due to age or maybe injuries or just the natural gradual decline of Kassian's play. Because for players who play his style, it's very hard to maintain that throughout their career. And this past season, Kassian only averaged around 12 minutes a night. And if you watch many Oilers games closely, he was invisible on a lot of nights. So I think it's fair to say that we should expect a little more from a guy who's making 3.2. Now, compared to Keith, I think the good thing about Kassian's situation is that at a $3.2 million cap hit, he's probably not impossible to move, considering the fact that the Oilers were able to trade away Milan Lucic, who was making $6 million a few years ago. And obviously, buyout could be an option, but the main question is, do the Oilers want to go down the buyout route? In my opinion, I think it's best to either trade him with some money retained or add in a sweetener, maybe a draft pick or a prospect to a team willing to take on Kassian's full contract. Now, one thing I would say is that if the Oilers do decide to trade Kassian this offseason, then they'll probably need to find a way to bring in someone who can replace him in terms of grit and physicality. Because over the last few years, the Oilers lost a lot of toughness in their lineup, and besides Kassian, the Oilers don't really have a legit fighter on the team. Maybe Darnell Nurse, but that's about it in my opinion. So if they do go forward without Kassian in the lineup, then I think it's important to bring back someone who can fill his role maybe at a cheaper price point. Because if you were to ask me, I think Kassian type of player still has a place in the game, especially if you don't want opposing teams to take liberties on your superstars. Now, the next player who I wouldn't be surprised to get traded is a name like Warren Foegele, especially if Ken Holland can find a taker for his contract this summer. Now, first, I must say that I'm actually a pretty huge fan of Foegele. I'm not a hater at all because he's a big guy who can skate and plays pretty hard on most nights. I watch a lot of Oiler games, and besides Zach Hyman and maybe Yamamoto, he's one of the harder working Oilers. However, like Kassian, Foegele doesn't come cheap. He comes in at a 2.75 cap hit, and from what we've seen this season, he spent the majority of his time as a bottom 6 forward. Despite being a bigger guy who can skate and he works pretty hard, many people probably probably criticize him because they believe he doesn't bring enough physicality or offense and isn't particularly a special teams guy as well. And I actually agree with those points because those are actually legit arguments. And with that in mind, if you're paying a guy 2.75, then you could probably find better value elsewhere, maybe around the 1.5 to 1.7 range to fill in your bottom 6 role. Because ideally, if Foegele had more finishing ability like Hyman or Kane, then he would be a perfect fit in the top 6 and would actually be on a pretty good contract and a nice addition for secondary scoring. But just looking at his stats, Foegele is turning 27 next year. And historically speaking, at that age, players are what they are. So I have a hard time seeing Foegele jump from being a 10 to 12 goal guy to maybe a 18 to 22 goal player. Yeah, this is nothing against Foegele, but I'm not sure if he has that in his game to be a 20 goal scorer in the NHL. I mean, he is still very consistent, averaging around 10 to 12 goals for the last 4 seasons. But based on what he brings in a limited 3rd or 4th line role, I'm not sure if Holland is willing to give him 2.5 for 2 more years. Next trade candidate on the Oilers roster might be someone like Jesse Puljujarvi. Bison King actually had a pretty good start for the Oilers earlier this season, and to me, he actually looked like he was going to break out and be a legit 20 goal, 40 to 45 point player. Essentially the type of complementary player many Oiler fans have been hoping for years. Despite getting plenty of opportunities to produce in the top 6 all year, for whatever reason, it seemed like his game got progressively worse as the year went on. To be fair, he was playing on a bargain deal at only 1.175 over the past 2 seasons. And Puljujarvi actually finished this season with a career high in points with 36 and was pretty consistent, scoring 15 and 14 goals the past 2 years. So in many ways, that was a very good signing by Ken Holland. However, the biggest question will be what Puljujarvi's next contract is going to be, and if Ken Holland is willing to commit long-term money. Because rightfully so, I believe Puljujarvi is going to get a pay raise and probably somewhere north of $3 million. However, my biggest concern with Jesse is that he looks lost out there sometimes, and the play actually dies on his stick in a lot of games. And there are also games where he isn't able to capitalize on a lot of grade A chances, where many legit top 6 forwards should do. So with that in mind, I feel like Ken Holland has to be very careful in terms of what the dollar figure will be and what the term will be. Obviously, Puljujarvi is not that old. He's only 24 years old, and he has great speed and size. So pretty much the intangibles you can't really teach at the NHL level. But the main argument for me is that he probably also has pretty good trade value right now. And if there's a deal available where Holland can package him to get a legit top 6 forward who can consistently get you 25 goals and who may be a better fit in the top 6 to play alongside McDavid and Draisaitl, then I think he might be tempted to pull the trigger, to be honest. And over the past few years, one of the main arguments amongst many Oiler fans are whether to keep Puljujarvi or Yamamoto long term. Ask me this question 2 years ago, I probably would have picked Jesse. Early this past season, I would have still picked JP, but by the end of this season, I think I'm actually leaning more towards Yamamoto. Reason is that because Yamamoto got progressively better over the past season, and on most nights, he is the far hungrier player who is far more grittier and rarely takes a shift off, and is arguably the hardest working Oiler along with Zach Hyman. Despite his size, Yamamoto probably plays 5 to 6 inches taller. Meanwhile, Puljujarvi has all the tools, but in my opinion, he doesn't really use his size or his speed to his advantage as much as he should. No doubt when Puljujarvi is on, he has shown the potential to have a higher ceiling than Yamamoto, but based on effort and the fit with the current roster, I think Yamamoto might actually be the better fit long term. Let me know if you agree or disagree. Now, both of these players are very young and high-end prospects, but at the same time, we can't forget that the Oilers have some very good younger players in their system, such as Dylan Holloway, Carter Savoy, Xavier Bourgault, and maybe even a sleeper like Tyler Tullio. Now, these are highly skilled players, and some of them actually have top 6 potential to be great complementary players for the Oilers' big stars. And if they continue to improve, they might be able to come in and make an immediate impact on the main roster in the next few years. So if you were Ken Holland and the Oilers management, would you want to commit long-term money to Jesse or save some room and cap space and give some of these young guys a chance to earn a spot in the next few years? Once again, Puljujarvi may have a higher ceiling than a lot of those prospects I mentioned, but the question is whether he will ever put everything together and be a consistent top 6 forward. Retaining Puljujarvi isn't the biggest question or concern in my opinion. It's ultimately determining what he is and what he's going to cost. Because if the Oilers commit over $3 million for a player like him, and if he doesn't improve, then they have a huge problem. Let's assume that he locks in that long-term deal and he stops improving, then I think his trade value will take a huge hit simply because of the money tied to his name. With that in mind, I think the current situation is the highest trade value the Oilers might have for Puljujarvi right now. Another name who I wouldn't be surprised to get traded this summer is Tyson Barrie. If you have been reading the rumors around the league, it seems like his name has been popping up quite a bit. And to me personally, it does kind of make sense because in one of my last videos, I did analyze the Oilers' defense. And to me personally, the only 3 names who are safe to return next year are Cody Ceci, Darnell Nurse, and Evan Bouchard. And once again, I don't think Barrie is a horrible player at this point. Some may argue that he's a rather useful player and is better than Bouchard in some areas of the game. But from what we saw in the playoffs in the 3rd round, especially against the Avalanche, you can kind of tell that the Oilers' right side definitely needs some improvements. Long term, I don't think Barrie and Bouchard can coexist on the blue line because Cody Ceci is the one who usually faces the tougher matchups, and then Bouchard and Barrie are not the best shutdown defenders. At the same time, in his first full season as an NHL player, Evan Bouchard already scored 12 goals and had 43 points. So if anything, I don't think the Oilers are willing to trade or give up on him just yet. And in many ways, I think Bouchard can slide into the first power play unit and take over Barrie's minutes. On the other hand, Barrie is coming off a pretty good season, scoring 41 points along with 7 goals and 34 assists, and was actually a pretty reliable power play specialist. But he is going to be 31 pretty soon, and in the next few years we might see Barrie start to decline a bit, especially with his skating and dynamic offensive play. So perhaps right now is a good time to sell. Financially, he's also on a pretty good contract, only at around a $4.5 million cap hit for 2 more years. So if Ken Holland really wanted to, I don't think it will be that hard to move Tyson Barrie. And if he does, then a roster spot opens up, and perhaps the Oilers could fill Barrie's spot with someone a little bit bigger and who can play a shutdown role, especially as a 2nd or 3rd pairing guy, kind of what Adam Larsson was when he was still here. To me, the bottom line is that trading Barrie gives this team 3 benefits. 1, it could potentially help improve the defense by bringing someone in who could be a slightly better defender. 2, it could maybe clear a little bit of cap space for the Oilers to unload and improve in other areas of their roster, perhaps targeting a forward who can replace Evander Kane if he doesn't resign. And thirdly, to give room for Oilers to break in a younger defenseman like Philip Broberg and give him bottom pairing minutes. Yeah, so let me know if you agree or disagree with what I said in this video, and which current Oilers player on the roster will get traded this summer before the start of next season. Feel free to comment below and share some of your thoughts, and I'll see everybody next time.